Recording in progress.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our workshop series on open educational practices with our esteemed visiting professor, Professor James Brunton. Just a couple of reminders before we start in this afternoon session, and in the case of Sir James morning, please be reminded to rename yourself with your department initials at the beginning of your full name so that we will be able to identify you for the workshop later on. And secondly, make sure to mute your microphones unless you are recognized to speak. And if you wish to open your camera, make sure that you're not moving around so that you will not distract other participants. In our group chat also, in the messenger, you can access our Zoom background if you wish to do so. For concerns and questions, use the raise hand button or type your query directly in the chat box, and the team will address your concerns. This afternoon is the second of the twofold workshop series on open educational practices, combating challenges with an open approach, with visiting professor Dr. James Brunton of Dublin City University, Glasneville campus, Dublin. This is brought to you by the Department of Professional Education, College of Education, with the Buka Project, co-funded by the Erasmus Plus of the European Union. This visiting professorship is designed to develop our faculty's skills in applying the principles of open education as the College of Education, along with the Institute, slowly matures in delivering quality distance learning education. Today is a workshop on the power of open, where we dig deeper on answering the question, what can open educational practices do for us? With a dynamic and productive sharing, last week, I am excited for today's interaction as well. So can you express if you are ready by pressing the thumbs up button or chatting one in the chat box? Go ahead. Ayan, thank you so much. Ayan. Thank you so much for your cooperation, and I guess you are as excited as I am. Therefore, without any further ado, let us all stand for the singing of the Philippine National Anthem and the prayer with the singing of the Hymno ng Pamantasan, to be followed by the recitation of the Institute Vision, Mission, and the College Goals.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Kayang magiliw ay nasasilananan, alam ng puso sa dikit mo'y bugay. Lupang binirang, tuyag na ng magiting, sa manluluping, di ka pasisigil, sa nanagang tulog sa simoy at sa langit mong pagaw, ay hinagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang isang ng atawad mo'y tagumpay na nagtitigil, ang bituin at parang niya kailan ang ay magtitigil. Lumanang araw ng warhabit pagsikap, buhay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya ng pagkay pag-aakit, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to meet together. Please help us to come together to make this institution reflect your kingdom. Breathe life into our ideas and decisions. Help us build a team that has love and respect at its heart. Give us the strength to continue working for your kingdom in this time of pandemic. Lord, come give us the inspiration to be the best we can be. May we be a shining example of your goodness and truth within, wherever we are. Inspire our thoughts, discussions, and ideas, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of you. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Sila isang katulad mong nasa
The MSU-IIT Vision, Mission, and College Goals. Our vision, a university committed to the holistic development of the individual and society. Our mission, to provide quality education for the development of Mindanao and the country through relevant programs in instruction, research, and community engagement. The College of Education goal is to produce highly competent teachers who will provide leadership in various disciplines through quality instruction, research, and extension to enable them to meet the demands of their social environment and its diverse cultures, thus making them productive agents of change in response to the country's quest for global competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome once again to our workshop 2 on open educational practices. I would like to ask a faculty member of the Department of Technology Teacher Education to give us a recap of what transpired during the first workshop session last week. Help me welcome with a round of virtual applause, Professor Victor Rosales of the Day 1 Synthesis. Sir Victor?
Thank you, Sir Janelle. Good afternoon. Our workshop last Friday, October 1, was focusing about Go Open and Introduction to Open Educational Practices. And I have 5 syntheses of the topic or the lecture that was given to us by our visiting professor, Dr. James Bunton. The first was our visiting professor started the lecture of open education as a philosophy and as a reference policy of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 4, which is quality education. He even quoted Martin Weller, which is also being considered an open university professor in UK, who would be the big proponent of open education, open educational philosophy and practices, that the key attribute of openness is about freedom. Freedom to give another thought. Wherein open education is not a short-term fix-to-fix passing problem, but is a long-term solution to ensuring equitable and inclusive access to effective educational resources and learning opportunities. And thus, the philosophy of Big O and Big E is about trying to provide an education system that is inclusive and that allows equitable access to higher education. Secondly, he talks also about the open pedagogy. The open pedagogy equates with the idea of open educational practices, where the use of educational resources to support learning or the open sharing of teaching practices with a goal of improving education. And emphasize that even the pandemic time or this pandemic, the importance of policy has been highlighted by the fact that the pandemic has had such an impact on what we do. The pandemic has caused certain new dynamics or taken existing dynamics and accelerated them. Thirdly, Dr. James Brunton also started or emphasized the basics or start with the basics and the practical of what is open education, what can open educational practices do for us, what problems can open educational practices solve, and if people are interested, what do you do now? Also, he added that there are some barriers to this. There are barriers to, the barriers are the people's attitude, which is the general kind of cultural assumptions about how open or closed we should be with our own work. And our lack of time and overwork, which is getting into open education is similar to getting into any other area. And it's often something that goes unstated or understated in higher education. Thirdly, Dr. Brunton also emphasized what is OER, Open Educational Resources, of which OER can support any form of teaching and learning. The key difference between OER and other educational resources is their license. David Wiley's 5 R's also was emphasized. The 5 R's was retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute. Dr. James Brunton also used the framework of Robert Square about the OER and the Creative Common License. One example of this is where can you see what is it, what's free, what's not free, what's non-adaptable and adaptable, and what is an open education resource, what's kind of semi-open and what's commercial. He even also give or provided us an example of OER repository, open textbooks, and where to find them. Fifth, Dr. Brunton also discussed what is OEP, or the Open Educational Practices, as the integration of open practices, open education resources, and assessment approaches into education, wherein the OER-enabled pedagogy is the set of teaching and learning practices only possible or practical when there is permission to engage with the 5 Rs. And also, he also emphasized what is open pedagogical assessment. And during the lecture of Dr. James Brunton, he also checked the temperature of the discussion or the lecture by having a poll on the different topics he discussed. After the lecture of Dr. James Brunton, there was the grouping of an activity or a workshop where the participants based from the group are having their discussion on the existing open practices and OR, what seems possible, and they discuss the attitudes, enablers, and barriers. And the first group that delivers their results or discussion was the IDS and the DPE group. That's all about the workshop that we had last October 1, 2021. Thank you.
So much, Professor Rosales, for your kind syntheses. And indeed, we learned a lot from the first workshop, and we shared also our thoughts on how do we engage in open educational practices. In this afternoon session, we will hear an input from our visiting professor, and then following that will be our breakout rooms and the Department of Science and Mathematics Education, the technology teacher education, and the professional education groups will then be presenting their workshop outputs in a little while. At this point, ladies and gentlemen and colleagues, allow me to call in our esteemed visiting professor from the Dublin City University, Dr. James Brunton. Dr. James, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that perfect synthesis of last week. Let's see. Just have to move some Zoom room bits around so I can actually get to the present button. Okay. So you're seeing my slides there, right?
Yes, Dr. James.
Yeah,
we're seeing your slides.
I know you are, but it's always, you just need someone to tell you that they definitely can see them. So that was a great synopsis of last week. We covered, we did that necessary thing of covering the definitions, kind of covering the context. So today, as we've been saying last week and this morning already, or this afternoon for you already, today we're going to try and go a bit deeper, and maybe with a more practical focus, a focus on sort of real life case studies of how these different practices are being used in order to try and generate ideas for you about what you might do in your own practice. Because that is how I was inspired to engage in any of the open practices that I'm currently engaged in. So again, similar plan to last week. I'm going to sort of explore things for about 40 minutes, and then we'll try and get into breakout rooms, which will be even more kind of hands-on and practical on your part than even last week. And then we'll get your feedback, hopefully, and we'll see how that activity went. So in terms of following up on last week, in terms of following up on the discussions that we had towards the end of the workshop, I had taken some notes, and I wanted to kind of start there to link this workshop back to the last one before getting on with the main things that I want to talk about today. So some of the notes that I took, when people were talking about some of the things they were doing already, they made reference to using certain free materials And I just took a note because it is one of those important distinctions in this area that free does not always equal open. So I was looking around for a good explanation of this from someone, and there's a Sparks SPARC website, and they're on one in their FAQs on open educational resources. Like this, so this is a quote from them: "Open educational resources are and always will be free, but not all free resources are OER. Free resources may be temporarily free or may be restricted from use at some time in the future, including by the addition of fees to access those resources. Moreover, free but not open resources may not be modified, adapted, or redistributed without obtaining special permission from the copyright holder." As we all know, with like Facebook and different types of social media, when things are free monetarily, there's often a different cost. It's our data that the company wants, so we are the product if the social network is free. Or it's basically we're getting something for free from a company or from someone else in order to put us into their space, so that later they can then leverage that to market things to us, or to put us in a position where we then feel like, oh, we're used to this product now, and now they want me to pay for it. I have to pay for it. And there's this concept in this area called open washing. And so open washing is where something, and this is a quote from Audrey Waters, having an appearance of an open source or open licensing for marketing purposes while continuing proprietary practices. So if you see something, if you see an individual or an organization or a company sort of saying that their products or what they have, their resources are open, but you don't see a Creative Commons license, you don't see the 5R permissions, then that's open washing. They're not really open. They're just kind of, they see people being interested in openness. So they're using that language, but they're not really open. And that's something to watch out for. The other thing that people were mentioning was this kind of idea of, the fear of failure or fear of criticism, if you put yourself out there. And this reminded me of there's this great guy in Canada in this space. He's phenomenal. And I have some of his resources in the workshop takeaways document. Rajiv Jangiani. And he made his own kind of 5 R's for open pedagogy, and they're more macro R's than the real OER 5 R's. But one of his R's is risk, that we have to acknowledge that being open makes us a little bit vulnerable, and that risk is there. We put ourselves out there, we expose ourselves to potential criticism and judgment, and that can have an impact, on us. And the other thing to acknowledge about that risk is that it's not evenly distributed. The more privileged we are in our institution or in society, the easier it will be for us to try these things out. For women or for people in groups that are marginalized in society, engaging in something that makes you more vulnerable and more open will carry a greater risk, and we need to acknowledge that. But I suppose on the other side, is there are benefits to that openness, and if we can kind of frame how people can engage with us, how they can make those judgments, if we can frame that as best we can, then what you end up with is you could create an open textbook, you put it out there into the world. If someone finds something wrong with it, and you've made a mechanism where they can just improve it, or give feedback, and then you can take that feedback, or they can take that feedback and improve the product themselves, then you've made something that can improve over time. So if we can leverage that instead of it being criticism, that it's basically improving the products that we, or the resources that we make, there's a benefit to that, but while acknowledging those risks. And the other thing that people were saying, initial effort is hard, which is just true. And we're strapped for time. And I suppose the way that I would pick up on that point, and I think I did a little bit last week, was to point out two things: that there are costs to everything. There are costs to action, and there's costs to inaction. So there are costs to maintaining the status quo. We keep having to get our students to buy a textbook every time the company decides to make a new version, you know, a new edition, even though they haven't changed much, but we're just trying to keep up with these editions, you know, that kind of thing. And there are benefits to switching to more open practices. And that's going to be my big focus for today, is trying to focus on what challenges can we address, you know, what benefits are there to engaging in certain practices, and then to give examples for people to maybe model on. And then in the workshop takeaways, to give you some more links where you can follow up and look at more examples. I think one other point, I don't know where I was going to make it, but one other point when we were talking about things was to some people in this space really try to focus on an argument about, you know, why should we switch to being more open, and it is basically that if we're working in institutions that receive any funding from the state or from local government, that really everything we do should be open by default. That, you know, if the people are paying for it, if the country is paying for it, then why would we do things that are closed, that they can't see, that they can't benefit from? So let's move on. So just to, we visited this point last week, but again, before, well, anyway, my thinking in this is influenced by a project that I've been on for the last few years, the Open Game project. So the Open Game project is an EU funded project, Erasmus Plus funded project, that its eventual goal, which it has achieved, was to make an online game to encourage people to engage in open educational practices. But as part of the early work in that project, we made a competences framework. So what competences did people need to engage in open educational practices? And I'm going to use bits of that framework today. But we were thinking about, well, what are the prerequisites before you even get to a competences framework? Like, what do people need to have? So one I mentioned last week was an attitude. They have to have the right mindset. If you don't want to be open and no one is making you be open, you know, then you're not going to engage in this stuff. So and then the other one was a certain level of digital competencies because of the relationship between this area and technology. So I found another quote that I thought picked this up well. So this is from a European Union publication, the Practical Guidelines on Open Education for Academics, Modernizing Higher Education via Open Educational Practices. So this is the quote: academics should re-examine their teaching practices to find ways in which they can share, collaborate, and learn from others. This requires a shift in mindset. The challenge is to open their pedagogical approach to the world and allow comments that will either reinforce this approach or propose changes to it. It also requires learning about the technologies that support openness. So there's those two things. You know, you need to have a certain level of digital competencies, and you need to have the right attitude. You need to have the right mindset. So this table is taken from, or it's kind of a slightly adapted version of the competences framework from the Open Game project, and you can find this in one of the project outputs from that project, the Handbook of Successful Open Teaching Practices, and that's in the resource or the takeaways document related to the workshops as well. So what we did as an exercise at the start of that project was start to think about, why would you use open teaching practices? So we started to think about open or educator challenges, you know, on what open educational practices would that be related to, and then what competencies would you need in order to do that practice. So now I would say my favorite thing about this competences framework is not what's in it, it is just the approach. You could argue differently. You could take this framework and you could say, I don't think that's the right competence, or I think that I think there's some competencies missing from that list. That's great. You know, you could build on this framework, but it's about thinking about it in this way. So, you know, some of the educator challenges. So broaden access to learning for enrolled students. So that's about reducing the costs. You know, if they're currently having to buy a textbook, you can take that cost away. by using open educational resources or open textbooks, but also in terms of accessibility. You know, if you let's say you find a really good ebook, so they don't have to buy a physical book, you know, but it's in the library, but maybe the publisher puts a limit of only 3 people at a time can look at that textbook. So now there's still an accessibility problem because you've got 60 or 100 or 1,000 people in your module, but only 3 of them at a time can look at this ebook because of publisher restrictions. That's a problem I run into all the time. If you have an open textbook or you have a collection of OERs as the reading, there's no accessibility problems anymore as long as they have access to the internet. You know, you can save yourself time by using existing resources. You know, rather than developing a resource yourself, you find a good one somewhere else, you can include it. You can improve the quality of your teaching resources. Maybe I have a great idea and I start putting something together, but, you know, maybe, you know, it's not the best resource in the world. Then I find someone else who has, or a team somewhere else that has really put together a similar resource, but it's much better than mine. If I take that and use it, I've automatically improved the quality of my pack of teaching resources. And if someone else, even if someone else is willing to share their whole curriculum with me, maybe I see things in their curriculum that makes me realize, oh, wow, my curriculum really could have been better. And not only are they just improving my teaching resources, it's improving the whole course design. So this is all related to using OER in teaching activities. So that's the kind of open teaching practice. So what do we need to be able to engage in that? We need to understand open licenses, because that's how I'm going to understand resources when I find them from someone else. And that's how well, actually, that's the next. I need to understand open licenses. I need to know how to find other people's OERs, and then I need to know what to do when I get them. You know, if I need to understand the license, and then I need to know, okay, can I tweak this a little bit? Can I change it? Could I give it to someone else then? Or, you know, how does all that work? So that's all about understanding the licenses, and then just practice probably after that. So then after that, it's about sharing, you know, sharing your teaching resources as OER. And like, so what like there's I suppose all these problems, all these challenges, some of them are small challenges, or you know, kind of small. So you could just say, oh, it'll improve my teaching resources if I use this high quality OER. Some are much bigger problems. So broadening access to learning for non-enrolled users. I mean, normally we don't worry about that. We don't worry about teaching people who aren't our students, you know. But if you are making videos for your students as learning objects, and then you put those on YouTube, you could have someone who's not in your university at all, who's there improving their learning, and maybe it gets them into a space where then they start to engage with higher education or further education, you know. So you're helping people who aren't even your students, you know, and that's good for society. By sharing your resources, you're saving time for others, you're helping improve the quality of their teaching resources. So along with, you know, the competences needed for finding other people's OERs and using them, here now you need a little bit more knowledge. You need to know how do I share, you know, OERs. And, like, you know, spoiler alert, that's through using repositories, or by sharing through social media, or through communities of practice, or just through networks that you have. And I'll talk about this next. Beyond that, then it's like a little extra delineation. You can improve the course design of other people. You can help other people not just use your resources, but if you're releasing a lot of stuff kind of packaged together, you can help people improve what they do in a bigger way. But there's I have a slide on that, so we'll get to that. So recently at the OE Global conference, Rob Farrow, who's a research fellow in the OU UK, he was like highlighting benefits benefits of using OER, basically. And I thought some of them were slightly different from what I was talking about on this slide. So I just wanted to pick out, he had a whole long list, and his whole point was there is literature now to show that using open practices, using OER, can improve student outcomes, and without sort of negative side effects, without any kind of other kind of negative impact on student learning. And because you are doing things that I won't read out the whole list because of time, but like, you are facilitating more diverse input into the creation of learning materials. You're allowing for more efficient use and reuse of intellectual property. You're allowing for pedagogical innovation and critical reflection, because again, you're opening yourself up. You probably think about your resource a little more when you're going to let everyone see it than when you're just going to, give it to your students and it's only ever going to be seen by you and your students. You're allowing more flexibility and provision in education and training. And, now he does make the point that this all has to be embedded in the right organizational culture. Otherwise you're going to have tensions between individual practice, maybe institutional policy, or maybe the institution is trying to encourage people to get into open practices, but the individual members of staff have, those cultural or academic cultural assumptions about openness and closeness. And, then it's difficult to get that going. And all this allows for more transparency and publicity in the creation and use of educational resources. So to get into the practical, remember this slide from last week. Here are all the different types of the different licenses. Now, I was tempted to make a poll that was like a quiz, but I didn't. So I was going to quiz you, but like, I don't like being quizzed, I'm sure. And the whole point of these licenses is that they're once you get a handle on them, they're not difficult to understand, because the stuff, the information is right there online. If you need to know what one of these licenses means, you can just go to the Creative Commons website and figure and do that. I'm just going to check my notes to make sure I'm not. Okay. So okay. So this is the list of all the different Creative Commons licenses and examples of the types of works you would then end up with. So an open textbook that you're going to allow someone else to use in their own course, they have to attribute you, but you also, if they take it and they make any adaptions, they have to share it the way you shared it with them. So that would be CC, BY, SA, attribution, and share alike. So I think, yeah, I was trying to make sure I wasn't going to do this later, but we're just going to look at how we do that. If I was going to do it later in the presentation, it doesn't matter. I can do it now. So I'm just going to, come back. So you should still, yeah, you're still watching. You're still following this browser. So I'm just going to go to the Creative Commons website. So creativecommons.org. And you click on share your work. And then this choose a license, choose features, optional info, get license, get started. And here we are. And it's as simple as a couple of clicks. Now I am going to do, this is where I'm going to do a poll, because we're all going to choose together. So the first option, do we want to allow adaptations of our work? We've all worked together and we've made, a little infographic on some aspect of open educational practice. Do we want to allow people to change it? So we're going to vote on that. Oh, well, it started out very yes, but the yes, as long as you share alike, are catching up. Okay, I think we've ended. So I'm going to end that poll. I'll share the results. So the yes has narrowly won out there. So if we had picked no, I'll just click no for a second, that puts the non-derivative into the mix. So that means people could take our stuff, they could use it, but they can't change it. They have to take it as a thing. But we didn't, and if we had said yes, as long as others share alike, we would have added the share alike to our license. But we said yes, so we are sticking with a CC BY. So far, all they have to do is give the reference. And here is something that really it really helps me, and it annoys me when it's not there. If you're making an open educational resource, try as much as you can to help the people give the attribution that you want. Some people just make OERs, they put it out there, and then you're going around trying to find the right information to give that attribution to the people that should get it. So stop sharing that result. So the next thing we have to do, are we going to allow commercial uses of your work? Now, this can be a bit more contentious, but are we worried about whether someone else is going to try and make money out of it? Generally, I don't care. Generally, I will just release stuff CCBY, and I don't want to worry about that. And also, there's this whole thing, I'm not going to get into it, but if you want to go to the website and read it, there's also this other thing about, this concept of a free culture license. So sometimes people say, I don't want someone else taking this OER and selling it on Amazon for $10 and trying to make money out of something I'm trying to give it. And that happens. Like there are people out there who make a living out of trying to monetize other people's open products, open resources. But again, so far, based on your understanding, you make a decision. If we had a resource, do we want to allow commercial uses of that work, or do we want to say no? Okay, I'm going to call it. Oh, I don't think the yeses can catch up. If you haven't voted and you're thinking yes, now's the time. Okay. So the no's have it. So we'll add no. So then that becomes CC, BY, NC, non-commercial. So people can use this as long as they are not specifically trying to make money out of it. Now, what that means exactly can get a little, I mean, in Ireland, my students are discriminated against in the education system. So they have to pay fees as opposed to getting what's called, I don't know, into the free education route. And where those students still have to pay money, but it's not called a fee, it's called a registration charge. But, if I used something that said NC, is that wrong? Because my students are paying a fee to get into the course. Is that commercial, or because it's a public institution and we're not a for-profit entity? Like things can get a bit tricky. I don't know. Maybe I'm just showing that I don't fully understand it there by saying that. But okay. So, and again, the Creative Commons website would say this is now not a free cultural license. You can go look at that if you want to, about what they mean by that and what the differences are. But we've put that restriction on it, and that's what we wanted to do. So they have to attribute us, and it can't be used by people who are specifically trying to monetize it. Or there might be a better definition of that on an upcoming slide. So if we go back to. So just to give some examples, so here is an open textbook that is in the takeaways list because, it's an OER starter kit. Seems like a handy thing for people to have. If we look at the open license on this, it's a Creative Commons attribution. So there's the two symbols, so you can take this textbook, you can adapt it, you can change it, you can remix it. They're not putting any restriction on whether that activity is commercial or non-commercial for you. So you can take this OER starter kit, you can look through it, think they're missing something, add some extra chapters, Now, again, that's always, now I'm not going to get into this because you could do a series of whole other workshops just on how you make and share open textbooks. That's a whole thing in and of itself, finding the right platform, all that kind of thing. But basically, generally, I would say if you find an open textbook that has an open license like this and you're going to adapt it, it's still a good idea to get in touch with the original authors and kind of negotiate the new author list with them, or just how you're going to do that, right? Because they did write some of it. So it's kind of like that halfway house between just academic writing, where you have to reference people, or, and this whole idea of open practices. But anyway, CCBY, that's the license that's on that product, that's on that open textbook. Oh, I did not mean to do that. There we go. So going back to the Open Game project. So the Open Game project has put out a number of outputs on the project website. One of them being this handbook of successful open teaching practices. Now, as a project group, the decision that was made was to not put a CC BY license on these project outputs. So this handbook of successful open teaching practices, if you look at it, it has the license CC BY NC ND. So a much more restrictive license. So when you take that handbook, you can take it, you can embed it in your teaching resources if you wanted to. It is open in that way, but not for commercial purposes. So someone cannot take this handbook and put it on Amazon and try to sell it, because that would be a very commercial purpose. And it's non-derivative. You are not allowed to just take this handbook as it is and adapt it. It's not adaptable in that way. We're not, the project group isn't allowing for that. Now, personally, I would have put CCBY on it and just left it at that, but the project group overall wanted to be a little bit more restrictive. Now, the other thing is, now the other thing to remember about that is that's just in terms of its openness. It's in terms of what you can do with it in that way. You could still take, the competences framework in it and write a paper about that kind of, you could include that in a paper and you could adapt it in that way, but that would just be normal academic writing. It's the difference between making something and just referencing something academically. So it's still a good source of academic information and all that, even if it has a more restrictive license. So where to find OERs and open textbooks? Really what we're talking about there is repositories or other, kind of websites that maybe aren't full repositories that give good links to where these OERs and open textbooks are. And like, I think we went over some of this, but not so deep last week. The first thing to recognize is that this is going to take time. It's going to take persistence to find these, and when the problem, what you really should do is think about the problem that you want to solve first. Think about what you're looking for, rather than just going into a repository that has tons of stuff and you're just kind of wandering around. You're trying to figure out what am I looking for here. Think about who else can help you. Do you have librarians who already have expertise in this area who can help you find what you're looking for? Do you already have colleagues who are using some open textbooks? They might be able to tell you, oh no, try these two websites. They're a little better than these other ones. And as you go, keep track. If you find good websites, bookmark them, take a note of them. If you find good resources, take a note of them. That will help you over time to get better at, knowing where these resources are and all that kind of stuff. So just some examples. If I'm using any images, and if my team is using any images, we're using images that are in the public domain, or we're using Creative Commons licensed images. And again, I showed you some of those last year. Museums releasing their whole collections of images. There are also loads of websites. Now, I've put a few here. So there's Unsplash, Pixabay, and then for icons, like little symbols and things you want to might put one into resources or into presentations, Flat Icon or the Noun project. There's way more websites out there, and they're just, all you have to do is check, is it public domain, in which case you don't even need to put anything underneath the image unless you want to. Some of them say it's nice to do it, but you don't have to. Or is it a CC BY license, and then you just have to follow that license, whether it's adaptable or not, how you have to attribute the person who created the image. Even within Google, now you have to be a bit more careful, but in a Google image search, click on tools, click on usage rights, and you can select Creative Commons license and restrict the image search. So and then what you will get is images that you possibly can use. Now, I would say that's not 100% perfect, that search tool. And I would always check individually the image or the website it's on. Is this really, what is the license really? Because sometimes like things come up under that search, but when you actually go and look at the image, it is a copyrighted image. And again, we had this slide last week. Where do we find OERs and open textbooks? In all these open educational OER repositories. So again, I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to do it. We're going to actually look at how would we do this. So I'm just going to pick one of these. So OER Commons. And what am I looking for? I'm not even going to really do a search. I'm just going to say I'm interested in social science. I'm really looking for something for a developmental and educational psychology module. So now I'm in social science, and they've broken that down into a number of sub themes or sub areas. And when I look down, okay, I've got some resources here on adolescent development, some more on adolescent development. Okay, that's a whole textbook on adolescent psychology. Again, I'm immediately seeing things that I can then start exploring, and seeing, is this something that I really want to use? So the next thing then is, how do I know that I want to use it? And there you really have to just get into, how do I evaluate something? Now, again, we're all good at that anyway. We're all good at critical skills in that zone. But just to sort of say, that's something we have to do. I mean, I think it's something we should do anyway. We shouldn't be taking it. We shouldn't be presuming that commercial textbooks or other sources of closed resources are automatically high quality just because there's a publisher who's supposed to do that work. So we have to be confident that this OER meets the learning outcomes that we wanted for. And people have looked in this area, and there's the Union Record 2019 kind of looked at a lot of the different metrics, the different rubrics that were out there. And this is kind of a synopsis of the list that they give. When we're looking at something, we can assess it on the basis of the quality of the explanation of the subject matter, the quality of the instructional practice and exercises, if it's a bigger resource that comes with those kinds of things. How accurate do we think it is? How clear do we think it is? How appropriate for our purpose do we think it is? Does it align with what we needed to do in terms of learning goals? How reusable is it? Does it have a very closed license? And is that a problem for us, or does it have an open license? And also some of the repositories have rating systems, so we can get an indication from people that are kind of in that community as reviewers, or just people using these resources. Does it get 1 star or 5 stars, 1 star or 3 stars? That might give us an indication about whether we want to use that resource or look at that resource. So that's finding. I mean, that's everything about finding things. Now we're on to that idea about sharing things. And this is again going back to Rajiv Janjiani's five R's for open pedagogy. Another one is reciprocity, that we're not just treating OERs as a big supermarket where we go and we pick things off the shelf, that we think about it as the Creative Commons, that it's something we give back to as well as take something out of. And that's about sharing our stuff. So again, that's just understanding license, being willing to, and understanding the license and going, okay, I've made this infographic. Do I want to share this with other people? Okay, well then what license do I want to put on it? CC BY, BY, and then share alike, non-commercial, non-derivative. What do I want to do? And the National Forum in Ireland has some nice infographics. They all just generally link back to that Creative Commons website, but they have some nice infographics, some nice guides on how to do that work. So this is just some examples. Just to go, yeah. Was there anything else I wanted to say there? There was actually. I'm just going to go back. So just to give some concrete examples of that. So the slide or an example of this was Lionel Morgado from the Universidade Aberta in Portugal, the Portuguese Open University. He basically started making slide decks, so just like slide presentations to share with his students. And then he started putting audio recordings over those slides. And at that point, he was like, why don't I just share this with the public as well? So he basically started putting those on YouTube. So his students were accessing these YouTube videos of his voice over PowerPoint slides, not very technically complicated, but then he was also releasing them to the public for kind of dissemination and public science reasons. And like, so he was creating better learning resources for his students, but also releasing them for other people. So that's one concrete example, and not terribly difficult to achieve if you decided to do something like that. So that's just one example. We'll come back. I think we'll come back to others. So improving course design, then that's just basically where if you start to make your materials open, at a point then your whole course might be open. There'd be no restriction to you, say, taking your whole course out of your virtual learning environment and sharing it with other people. And like just some projects that we did. I was involved in an Open Teach project that was a nationally funded project where we were making materials to teach people how to teach online, and everything is open from that whole project. And we turned the outputs into an open textbook. People can take this whole thing and like make a course for teaching people how to teach online. So that project has absolutely has the potential to improve people's course design in that area. And then the whole open game project has done the same. Not only did we make this online game, but we released the entire curriculum and content underneath it. So people can take that course curriculum and make any kind of open educational practices course they want out of those materials. So we have definitely has the potential to improve people's course design. So whatever you have, if you could give people enough resources, you could help them build a whole course. So again, back to this idea, working with students. So getting back into more kind of open educational practices, open educational or open pedagogical assessments. You can see these are the kind of challenges that we're talking about. How do we increase student motivation? How do we increase student engagement? How do we sort of assess students in a useful way for their future career? How do we use the learning potential of students' online life? Okay, connecting that to using OERs with students, co-producing your content with students, using more real world assessments. So maybe this kind of idea of the open pedagogical assessment, and supporting students to learn in the open. And you can see we're just talking about we're adding in on top of open the right mindset and the digital competences. We're talking now about facilitation skills and things like that. And adding into the competences we were talking about earlier, you have to be confident enough with your own ability to know about licenses or know about some of these practices to then guide students in doing that, and to manage the risks for the students and help them to manage the risks that come with some of these activities. And so you're getting more into, you're talking about, you need to be able to design these kind of open educational experiences, and then you need to be able to work with the students to do that. So, we always should be acknowledging and mitigating the risks in this area. We should be offering an opt-out or an alternative way of doing an activity or an assessment, or giving choice to the students. And that's about that, again, to go back to Rajiv's 5 Rs. There's one on respect, that we have to not just turn this into another thing that we tell students they have to do and that's it, that it's about respecting their choices around intellectual property. If you say, students are going to make OERs, and someone says, I do not want my intellectual property to be licensed in that way, we should be respecting that choice. They should have that option to either make it an OER or not, because that's kind of part of the philosophy. It's kind of part of the mindset. So some examples in this area, so just to give some concrete examples, using open data rather than constructed data in research methods, or anywhere where you would normally maybe take some data for students to look at or to analyze. And there's a link to kind of open science principles there, which again would be a whole other workshop series. Another example would be to take an open textbook, which is produced using other OERs, plus some original content that you add in, and then allowing student feedback to augment that over time. So Riccardo Lucanelli teaches physics at the University of Milano Bicocca in Italy. I'm probably mispronouncing those. So he took other people's OERs, put them together, added in some of his own material on physics, and then released that to the students as the textbook. But the students can comment every year on what they think could be improved. And then he looks at those comments at the end of the year, and the students help the textbook evolve over time. Beyond that, you could also write the textbook with the students, and the students contributing to the textbook each year could be part of their assessment. So that's kind of an open pedagogical assessment idea. If you can find good MOOCs, like massive open online courses that are out there already, there's some examples where people have seen, oh, this is a really good MOOC. It's as good, if not better, than the module I'm teaching. I'm going to ask students to take the MOOC in their own time. And then when they come to class, rather than trying to teach them what the MOOC is teaching them, we will then use the class, we'll flip the classroom and use the class to do practical stuff. I don't know. The rest of that sentence because I've lost it. So there's another example from the Open Game Handbook is where classroom activities then became hackathons. They became really condensed and well-planned, intensive sessions to build on what the students were now learning outside of the actual class time. You can co-design your syllabus with the students. So there's an example from Professor Amy Nelson. So instead of just giving the students at the start of the year, this is the syllabus we're covering, there is some wriggle room, and the students in the first week or two negotiate and co-create the fill out the syllabus with the professor, and then so they get better buy-in from the students because they kind of helped decide what it was they were going to study. Specifically then focusing on open pedagogical assessments, to give some examples there. So you can have examples where what students do comes back into the course. So I've got students who in an intermediate level module do qualitative interviews on a particular topic. And last year they kind of openly licensed their interviews that they did. And we reused them in a foundation level research methods course where the students analyzed those interviews. So what the students made got sucked back into the course and had a life beyond their assessment. Also, if we have students doing videos on social psychology topics, we can take those videos, and if they give the right permissions, we could use those in the learning materials in future years, and the students get to be taught by other students in those videos. You can make an open textbook with students, like I was saying earlier. So Professor Robin DeRosa, I think she's in Canada, or maybe she's not, but because the book she made with students was the Open Anthology of Early American Literature, and she made that with students, and students kind of she uses that as an assessment, the students' ability to contribute to that. Or similar to that is assessments where students actually edit Wikipedia. And now you need some editing, you need to know about editing Wikipedia pages and all that kind of stuff in order to kind of do that. But there's a lot of really interesting assessment examples out there that do that. And the other one then is about getting students to work in the public. So part of their activities or part of their assessments in this case might be that they write blogs that are public, or as public as you think is appropriate. Then or they vlog, they do they create videos that are out there in the public, or they're engaging. So again, another example from Portugal. There's an example where software engineering students actually work in professional communities of practice. So they work with software engineers out in the wild, who are out working, and like their assessment is all around doing that, is around their ability to actually, as students, work with professionals on a particular problem. So again, you're getting them more out there in the world than if they were just doing something that was just kind of simulated within the closed classroom. And the other one is where you offer students more assessment choice. So they choose what their assessments are, or they kind of have choice within that. And that's kind of just opening things up a bit more for students, that it's not just, here's the one question, that's what you're going to answer. You know, it's very closed. So I've gone over time again. I didn't think I was going to. So stopping me talking and getting on to what you can do. We want to do the breakout rooms. So we, again, like last week, make sure you have a spokesperson or a note taker. But what I want you to focus on today is what practices do you want to implement? Now, as a group, you can kind of discuss like what ones, if there's more than one, but like for the rest of the exercise of the first like half the breakout room, maybe you discuss the different ones you might be interested in, but narrow it down to one to work on as a group. And then, so the second half of the breakout room should be like actually making a rough implementation plan. Do people have the Google Sheet or the Google Doc link already, or will I put that in the chat?
Yes, Dr. Brunton, but I can also put the link on the chat.
Okay. So just to explain, I've made a Google Doc that you can kind of work on collaboratively, so you can kind of fill that out. So if you're breakout room one, then you're group one. I don't think we have more than 5 groups, because I think that's how many were made. So the practice name is just whatever name you want to give the practice. The practice description, it's not like, don't explain open pedagogical assessment or anything. That's the description. That is your plan. You know, the practice description is what is your kind of rough implementation plan. But also then I want you to think about what needs would you have in order to be able to do that? Would you need more training? Would you need particular software? What would you need to do it? And then what are the benefits and the risks of engaging in that, So will we kick off the breakout rooms before I take up even more time?
Chat. Okay. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll be opening the breakout rooms, and we'll be back by around 2:27. We'll have 20-minute breakout rooms, so please do maximize your time together. And we will have 3 presenters after the workshop session, the breakout session rather. All right, Sir Eric, we'll have the breakouts. Thank you so much.
Ay, ala, sorry, katawa kong maay.
Wala yun ako. Ang TV
Pafangan
na ako. Ang TV
Wala
na
man.
ako day.
Na naman ti TV manggod.
Oo, naamat.
Naa ato nang ibutang dito.
Ang kuha na to.
Walay
Coffee
katre.
maker na to.
Wala pa
Walay
wala pa
katre.
coffee. Nag-request pa ming Sir J. Ay, pero
Coffee maker.
Next
Katre,
one.
Sir Ben na.
Walay katre.
Sa clinic.
To sa clinic.
Para katulgan ba?
Para katulgan clinic.
ang sofa sir, pwede gyud katulugan kay kuan.
Pwede may mong bed. Pa-convert
Ay,
into
itot
bed.
na.
Okay.
Na. Group 1 lagi ta, sir. Ay, nga lang nga DSME maning akong kuan. Nakadug group 1. Okay, lahi di ay ni.
Dili lagi makita ang participants nato there, no? Makita.
Let's see.
Naigi-share si Jay nga bago.
Naigbago lagi, sir, kay nakasulod man ko sa DSME manuon to, group 1.
Same na siya, ma'am.
Same
Sa
ra.
Augusta.
Yeah.
IDPRE. Group
One,
2 data 2.
Group 1 lagi ni Sir gihapon. DS Group
Scroll down,
1.
ma'am.
I see. Oo, sakto di ay no. Kay isa ra man.
IDPRE.
DPRE, number 2 di ay ka, Sir. Ooh, needs.
Oh, dili na ka mo. Tulo lang.
Okay.
Recording in progress.
Okay.
Kanang screen pa sa KTTO. Kaya
Pwede.
makakuha naman kag copyright, Creative Commons license. Is it equivalent to copyright?
Recording in progress.
No.
Yes, I think so.
No?
I think so, yeah. Part siya sa range of licenses.
Oh, no?
So, ano ko na siya pag-access ng document na, ang malapit ba?
Kani,
yeah.
nasa link dito.
Yeah, there. Okay. Open in docs. Magsulat-sulat, Raman, no? Okay. Okay.
So, June?
Kung saan pag-edit?
Hello, Juniel.
Yes, ma'am.
So, kani siyang, di ba, murag akong understanding ani, kay ang mga buka ra ang, ano ani?
Anyone, ma'am, na na-add rin, ma'am?
Ay?
Yes, ma'am. Mag-sharing man siya, ma'am. Sharing of ideas or something. Di lagi ko ka-edit. Why can't I edit? Hala, di na ko ka-edit. Why?
Asa man mo nabutang ni siya dong? Nasa drive? Kani exploring o IP, ano?
Gi-explore ni kuan, ma'am. Gi-explore.
Recording stopped.
Gi-share ni sir sa sa chat. Sir J.
Okay. Okay, murag wala akong nakapaminaw.
Dili ko ka-edit.
Amo na. Katong imong question kanina ba, kung buka lang, ang basin na misinterpret na to ang information. So, ano ni siya, ma'am? Part ni siya sa atong buka initiative, pero para ni sa tanan, ma'am said.
Ay, kung magud pag when Jeruel, give me the invitation, ang yan gisultira gid sa ako kay mamang mga buka participants daw ang appeal ko nga. Amaw ba? So,
Kani ma'am, buka project mo si ma'am, pero buka, kita tanan ma'am, pwede.
Ay, siguro ang uban mamami, di man po ready, kaya ang uban ba ay mga klase. So, siguro,
lagi ma'am.
Kung katurang available, nga dili, ang ako understanding kay basta buka, required gid sila nga mo-appeal. Pero katong dili mga buka members, ira mo appeal sila kung dili sila. Kung free pa ang time.
Wala yung ginatawag na buka members, buka not members, ma'am. So, ang atong buka project
Recording in progress.
Muli classroom. Kung sa may common ito gigamit. Mga practice.
Wala man is drawing.
Wala ra ba kay module?
Sa drawing pen. Pero kana ang pinaka-common.
Wala ko kay update pag ko sa lesson gani ron.
Pero unsa ba atong laboratory manual siguro, ma'am?
Gamit sa tanan. Aw.
Your active online learning guide. Material? Material siguro, ma'am? Sige. Practice description. Need support and training.
Practice description, asa man yung magamit? These are materials for students across the district chart.
Instructional resources.
Unsay gamit ana?
Instructional resources. Ilam taaning watak sabot eh.
So man, to learn.
Recording stopped.
These materials are available online for remote learning.
Last na close or improvement. Is the organization selecting opportunities for improvement and implementing this action to meet customer requirements?
To facilitate, ma'am.
Dan, kay ikaw gayaw-yaw, ikaw gi-present ani ha.
Ito, dili ako eh. Share ako, share. Sa mga ano eh, support and training. Webinar?
Oh, pwede.
Webinars. Webinars and
Kuan kanang maayo ani mentoring.
Mentoring? Kinang needs, no? Peer mentoring?
Kanang kabaluan na ba? Sabi
Oh. So may kinanglan. Software. Money. Needs good. Finance. Financial needs. Saan mo na? Para sa training. O mga peer mentoring. Software.
Software. Sa man software ka na? Katumuli.
Mga kuan, flash video chart. Mga applications.
Ano flash video, friend?
Flash man na, friend. Kanang mo interactive. Kuan mo ra siya part sa Adobe. Flash. Adobe Player.
Murag mo tuon na gyud ko friend nimo friend. Kinahanglan ako mo retire.
Pero ambot.
Wa na gyud ko ka-gets.
Good anak man gud ako ang master.
The end because of the movie.
Pero wala ko ka-apil atong kangkuan. Dr. Wim, sayang.
Sampay gid siya.
Wala
Yes.
wala mo check sa kuan ma'am no, diretso ra po.
Unsa to siya, Des?
Wala mo check sa ato
Is it with full access, not full access? Asa to gani-ganina. Oy, nakakuha mo.
Gani mag-share screen ko, mama.
Oo, sige ko na search.
Mga e-learning materials, mag-create like e-learning materials accessible for students.
Kani ay use ang practice, open teaching practice mo ni siya.
Oo, ana DIO. Use or to address learners' preference and learning needs. Co-produce your content with your students. Gwapo ba ng co-produce, no? Kay mo dili kay bugat. Use OER to address learners' preferences and learning needs.
Kani siguro 1, no?
Ana siguro ang 1O. Support students to learn in the open. Ang use naman da ito. Kanang 1 lang sa ato, Sir J. tingali.
Preference and learners, learning needs. Yeah, katong mag-create ag learning.
Oo, di ba, sir?
Learning materials nga to support students kuan.
Oo, kana lang sa sir, no? Training on module, open resources.
Kana.
Oo, kana, sir.
Recording in progress.
Tapos
benefits address.
Kaning needs, okay na ni? Kaning
Isa ra?
support.
Training on module, making on structural materials, gid siguro as a
Module, right? Development siguro, training on
IM
Instructional materials
skills
development.
development. Yes sir, kay murag
Apila man na
encompassing.
module. Yung
Yes, sir.
module kay instructional materials man na.
Oo, encompassing na tanan sir no.
Trainings on
IM development. IM's development.
Kay para ipapatent po na siya or ipaka-copyright.
Yay.
Yeah, ma-develop nga mga kuan.
Go DPRE.
pero murag open resource siya, no?
Open resource. So di ay kung pwede po kuan na to og kuan ipa-copyright or open din siya nga.
Recording
or,
stopped.
Tapos
Your address learners' preferences and learning
yung benefits.
Train on
benefits and rest.
Kana
Sakto
bitaw.
na akong gibuhat. Dili.
Okay, maka-share ta sa the benefits. We can share to all teachers.
Enhance students' learning on the topic using the materials. Enhance the teaching and learning
Kana, sir.
process.
Both na teachers and learners.
Enhance the teaching and learning process using the open instructional materials
or resources.
Or instructional
materials or resources. ORs, instructional materials.
Recording in progress.
Emphasize nato nga open, mahimo siya open resource na ilang output.
Video presentation.
So kung may line. Model, physical model. Ano ba?
Recording stopped.
Sige ng website gani. Kanang magbuhat sa
website.
Kuan Google Sites kay free ra.
Google site.
Kuya, physical model mo na ni mga answer, mga PDF files, mo na ba na siya?
But lang.
Kanang written na written, basin ganahan sila written na kuan. Written outputs.
And more, etc.
Depende sa problem. Nasa man this is good sa any problem.
Di kay ka madunggan, ma'am.
Sorry. Kana man yan. Kani madungog.
Performance.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Something sa kuan.
Kuan di ma'am. Vlog. Ay.
That employ sa ganitong authentic learning tasks and pangbuhaton ani. Need support training, software equipment. Sa mga kuan gani ani. Yan tawag training. Student made lesson
Murag
plan.
kuan siguro kanan mag-develop sa software application or unsa ni siya. Kaya may software equipment. Open access. Unsa ni open access to? Kuan lang siya kanang Google Drive lang kibali ni siya sa ilay no open access to the lesson.
Kaning open access instructional materials.
Kaning open access student made lesson plan.
Kung mahimo kay kuan pod. Sana
Website kibali ana siya.
Mas-share pod siya kay para basi na apoy uban na mga kuan ba, di ba na? Pwede man gud to nga para di ba kay one of the reasons kay i-open siya kay for kanang
kuan na lang. Sa needs nato, technical support na lang siguro in developing a website. Kay mas accessible man ang website. Pwede rin na sila iusa dayon no sa student-made o sa kanang physical activities. Unsa kay general name niya ba, practice name para mausa na din na silang duha kanang duha sa isa ka website. Kibali sa isa ka website na natay kanang student-made nga lesson plan, na natay physical fitness.
Kuha na lang.
Oo.
Technical support yung uploading the
resources
into one
website.
No?
Link or website na lang siguro sa ba.
Open
sila in terms of resource open.
Repository?
Oo, tama, repository. Pero ang Google Drive, manggod kaya ma-consider man siya repository, di ba?
Manang nga itong ibutang nga open into one open repository link that can be accessed
by anyone. Anytime by anyone. By anyone, anytime. So, ano na siya?
By anywhere.
Accessible to faculty or the student as well.
Or ibaliktad na lang na Sirly, access by anyone, anytime, anywhere. Na lang.
Iwa pa rin.
Skilling.
Oh.
Skilling.
Skill siguro nga katong
Skill ba nga skills?
Skills, oo.
Katong skills bitaw Sir Jay kanang skills upskilling. Retooling and upskilling. All right.
At 20 seconds na lang.
Okay na nga atong name?
Creating, open.
Practice name? Okay na siya?
Atong sa example ganina, Sir Jay, murag sa to imong
or naapay lain nga name nga mas attractive.
Challenge man eh.
Attractive nga name.
Murag okay naman tingay na sir.
In the meantime.
In the meantime. How are we going to dub it?
Kay name man siya, no? Name. Dapat siya noun. Oo. Kung creating man good more on action siya, no? Kung
recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Based on our meeting in the breakout rooms, we really had fun. We have a very good discussion. And I think Dr. James was also looking over the document as we, typed in our ideas and shared our thoughts on the practices that we want to implement in the future. So I know that medyo bitin, no? We really lack the time. But we can only close and proceed with the presentation since we only have this amount of time for the workshop this afternoon. So this afternoon, each presenter, a representative of the departments, will have 5 minutes to present Okay, so please be mindful of the time that you present your ideas. So the following is the order of presentation. First, a representative from the Department of Science and Mathematics Education, followed by the Department of Teacher Technology Education, and finally a representative from the Department of Professional Education. So I'd like to ask now the representative from the DSME to present your output.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Sir James. This is our output for DSME. We have here, these are the practices or practice name that each of the faculty of the department has contributed. So we have here open access MATLAB, open access STEM projects, open access student made lesson plans, research exercises, pedagogical assessment, as well as modules on for the K-12 mathematics lessons. For the MATLAB, this is its description is share, develop curriculum or module on teaching math in elementary grades as commented by students. It needs quality assurance of developed curriculum or modules and materials. Secondly, proper citation of materials in the modules if there are, and its benefits is to improve the improvement of the materials over time, and the risk is the misconception within the module. Second, the STEM project, it's a compilation of student-teacher collaborated STEM projects on different science topics as prototype products of STEM lesson plan. And it needs a training workshop for STEM approaches and a STEM project for the students, as well as maybe other faculty or members or teachers. And its benefits, it could give a contextualized and inquiry-based learning environment, meaningful learning for the students, improvement of science activity instrumentation. But the risk is the misdirection of the topic, since this is an integration of different science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And for number 3, student-made lesson plan. That is to this is a co-create lesson plans with student in math and science to produce a shareable lesson plan to be used as lesson exemplars that can be used by other BS Ed or B.Ed students from other universities. So these are the lesson plans made in practice teaching by the students and compiled to be made into open access student-made lesson plan. And it needs proper communication, of course, with the students to produce lessons with the aim of producing OAR, since maybe some of the students, since the students made this lesson plan, they could have copied some of the things in the internet. So proper communication. And then benefits is uphold role as center of excellence in teacher education. Assessment is aligned to real life context and critic by other experts and teachers from the ed. Yes, because these lesson plans has already been implemented in the classroom in the Department of Education. And risk is the misinterpretation of the university in the OAR. And then Then we have research exercises. This is a compilation of research activities and exercises which will enhance the research skills of the students. I think time has run out. Uh, the needs or the support it needs, maybe it needs some training and training workshop, and then its benefits, students will be guided in the writing of the research proposal, which is it's a very good practice if the students would be able to be guided in the research proposal to have readily or presentation or publication ready researches. And then we also have the pedagogical assessment and modules on K to 12 mathematics lessons. The last open access on modules for K to 12 mathematics are also compilation of modules created by the students with the help and guidance of their teacher in a subject in the graduate school, which aims to give or improve modules that were to be implemented also in public schools, in K to 12 public schools. I think that's it for our department.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Rica May Guarin. I would like to ask Dr. James if it would be okay if all the presenters would present first before you give your insights.
I was just going to suggest the same.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. So let's welcome the next representative from the Department of Technology Teacher Education to present your outputs as well.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Okay. So I'll be sharing our implementation plan that we have made. So the practice name would be designing an interactive online learning guide for major subjects for the courses here on the department. So the description would be materials that are available online for remote learning for students to learn the processes, assessment, and skills relevant to the topic for these major courses. So the needs would be e-learning resources such as computer, laptops, applications, and softwares. And we also need webinars and workshops to develop these materials using the following applications and software. And also we have to add this peer mentoring on the use of developed materials and the financial needs, especially in procuring new softwares and application, and the administration support for the plan and the policy implementation on the use of the online learning guide. So the benefits and risks. So the benefits would be expanded access to materials and resources for students, promotes independent learning or self-paced learning for students, thus expense to students, showcasing their best practice in innovation of teachers to future teachers, right? Help improve the quality of teaching resources by conducting action research on the applicability of the resource material. So the risk could be some student could have lack self-directed learning and lack of human interaction between student and teachers because the asynchronous, or the students would be just having their face on reading the materials or the resources. Technological issues, just low internet. Some sources may not be relevant and or accurate in the need or needs updating. And language or cultural barriers may be and common to all of these description and these benefits and risks, there are also practice such as designing of online skills assessment drill and develop collaborative materials with the students. Okay, I guess that would be all for our presentation of our output. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir John, for sharing. And let's now welcome a representative from the Department of Professional Education. DPRE, the floor is yours.
Okay. All right, so I am tasked to present our output for this workshop about our implementation plan for exploring OEPs. So our practice name is Open Online Instructional Materials. So the description of this plan would be for students to use OER to address learners' preferences and learning needs. So the support and the needs that the faculty would suggest include, of course, training on instructional materials development, particularly on open resources, and then fostering digital literacy also among teachers, and retooling and upscaling. For the benefits, so for example, if we are able to develop this open instructional materials, we would have open resources for our students, and we would also be expecting to enhance the teaching and learning processes using the open instructional materials. And for teachers, especially those who will handle the subject, they will be provided with a readily available resource. The risk, one of the risks that we could think of for having this open online instructional material is the accessibility of the materials by our students due to connectivity issues. So for now, this is our implementation plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir J. Ruel, for your presentation. At this point in time, I'd like to call in our visiting professor to give his feedback and insights with the presented outputs from the workshop. Sir James.
So all that work was amazing. I mean, looking through the whole document, people are already obviously thinking about things that they could do. They're thinking about materials they already have, or things that the students are already covering and how those could be more open. And like I thought, like one example I saw somewhere was co-create the lesson plan with the students, but then also make that open access. So like you can see you're combining two open educational practices there. And like you could be engaging in a bit more, student democracy or student partnership, or getting them invested in the process. And again, this is one of the things again that I've heard Rajiv Janjiani talk about, is that part of this idea is like, why are we're trying to make our students competent, professionals, but then at the same time we're kind of treating them like children sometimes, where it's like, we've made the plan, we've made the lesson plan, and I'm just going to give it to you and you do it, rather than engage them, in that kind of partnership mode and get them to help doing it. But then also, if you release those lesson plans, you're showing other people that practice, and you're helping improve their course design. Like there's so many ideas in here where that's what people are doing. Just one thing I think in that last one, it was like that one the risk is one of the risks is accessibility due to connectivity. And it reminds me at the recent OE Global Conference that a conversation like that was happening in the chat, in a Zoom chat, as people were presenting, and someone who was really into open education was saying, can open educational resources be offline? And other people were coming in on the chat going, this is my whole area. It is essential that OERs can be both online and offline, because otherwise, how do we tackle connectivity problems, or problems, of where whole regions are not well connected to the internet? I wish I don't know who that person was, but definitely there are people out there whose whole thing around open educational resources would be, how do we share them through different modes to tackle that problem? And obviously, it reminds me again of the Buka project. The Buka project, the institutions in the Philippines and in Indonesia, a lot of what they're doing is how do we engage people in remote regions, who are not well connected. So anyway, without getting into all that, but some of the things around to frame people's thinkings, or some of the things I would say around these ideas about how do we push these ideas forward, take an innovation pilot approach. If you have an idea, especially if a group of you have an idea about, this is something we could do in the team, this is something we could do in the department, sort of write it up as a pilot. Okay, if we were going to follow that plan, take a lesson plan, co-create it with the students, share that, how would we do it? Write up the parameters. Who are we going to do it with? When are we going to do it with? What resources do we need? But try and design it in that way, and then follow up on it afterwards. So try and figure out, what happened? Are we happy with it? Would we do it more widely? Try to have that approach. Because I found that very useful, and I've been very frustrated by colleagues who just do stuff, or just even encourage other people to do stuff without having a good frame on it, so that they can kind of say, this is what we did, this is how it went, and here's what we think of the result. And I suppose that links to another point. If at all possible, if you're doing these things, tell other people. Again, share your experiences. Just that's part of the open mindset as well. But at least wrap evaluation around it, and maybe share in the networks that evaluation. How did it go? But better yet, if you could wrap kind of a research project around this innovation, around that kind of innovation pilot, and then share that through academic channels, so that other people can learn from what you've done. And also, if you're an academic, it never hurts to do research and have publications behind, showing what you did. Some of the things I've done over the last 10 years, and I look back in hindsight, and I'm like, as far as the world of academia is concerned, it never happened, because I didn't do that evaluation, I didn't do that research, and I didn't, so I didn't manage to give it out to the community in that kind of written up way. And like someone else was saying there about, or just that linking back to that point about the offline, one of the things about open educational practices is it does allow for a greater mix of synchronous and asynchronous activity. If you're using a MOOC, if you're saying, actually, this MOOC is amazing, take this MOOC, and then we'll use the class time to push the ideas further, to do activities and things. Whereas before, your whole interactions with the students might have been in that synchronous time, you're kind of now in creating different asynchronous and synchronous possibilities. Does anyone have any questions? Or we're going way over time again. I really thought I would not talk too long this week, but I think I did.
Dr. James, regarding with the time, I guess there's no problem with us. We really love to hear your feedback on our input. Actually, today is when I try to look at the output of my colleagues, I guess they want to implement the discussion that we have. My question is, I guess that's DTTE. They want to make an open e-learning material. So what is your recommendation? So do they need to use also an open resource in making their open learning material, like their interactive stuff or what?
It depends on what you have and how you want to share it. I mean, like our let's say in my institution, the virtual learning environment is Moodle. So let's say if I could take out some of my the materials that we give to students, and I could put it in a Google Doc, or I could put it in something different, and then I could share that through a repository. But I could also kind of just make a Moodle backup file for the whole, a whole section of the course or a whole module. And as long as everything in that module is open and is not sort of copyrighted, I could sort of through a repository or through a network say, if someone wants my entire backup file, you can just import that whole course into your version of Moodle, and edit it, change it whatever way you want. But if you want the whole course, I can just share it that way. Now, you'll always run into some technical problems. If you've used, like, I think for the Open Teach project, the problem we ran into is we used a lot of H5P in that course, and then it turned out that the way H5P was linked to our VLE, if you just gave it to someone else, all the links broke. So that was a major technical problem, but I think they've fixed that in the meantime. I think Moodle and H5P talk to each other better, but you'll always run into some kind of issues. But if as long as the problem you're going to have is, let's say, if some of your materials are commercial. So at some stage, my institution had an agreement with a company, Epigeum, to provide. So Epigeum provided some student socialization materials to the university. So the university's central student socialization materials were a mix of things that had been created in the institution and materials that were completely copyrighted and could not be shared openly from this company, Epigeum. So later, when I was involved in this group and I was saying we should really be pushing this more towards the open, to do that, before we could even think about making any of those materials open, all that Epigeum content had to be taken out, because you could not share it when there was copyrighted material here and there. So that's kind of, to share materials, you have to make sure that like everything in there is open. If someone has done that traditional academic thing of just, I went to Google and I just took some images from here, there, and everywhere, and I put them in a presentation, and that's inside the material somewhere, then there's a problem, because they're all copyrighted images. That practice only ever made sense before we took our teaching online, and after that, it all became very precarious. Does that answer the question at all? It's kind of, in terms of format, it would be, I suppose you could look at the repositories that are out there and look at the examples that are there. How are other people sharing? How are other people sharing their materials, and sort of get a sense from that? But there's so many ways of doing it.
Thank you, Dr. James.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Ami, for raising your question. And we also have a question from Sir Jay. All right, so the question goes like, my students are designing their own assessment instrument, like rubric, for their project-based lesson. Can they make it an open resource for assessment?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a combination of two things. Again, that's the combination of student partnership, and I have one of my staff wants to do that this year as well, in an introduction to psychology module. She wants to involve the students somehow in kind of fleshing out the rubric for the assessment. It's more to teach the students about how a rubric is put together, to get them thinking like a teacher and an assessment marker rather than being on the other side. So the whole thing there would be getting a collective agreement from the students about what license to put on the rubric. And then if you negotiate that agreement and you choose the license and it's got the license on it, then you just release it through social media, through a smaller network, or through a repository with other people. So yeah, I mean, it's all just, the only thing that is required there is choosing the license and having agreement from the people who created it.
Thank you so much, Dr. James. Are there any comments and questions? other comments and questions from our colleagues? All right, I think there are no other comments. Again, at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank Dr. James for the very wonderful presentation and for opening our minds for many possibilities of open educational practices. And I would like to ask our colleagues to join me in showing our appreciation to Dr. James by presenting to him our certificate of appreciation. I'd like to ask the team to all right, thank you so much, Tech, for showcasing this certificate. To Dr. James, we present this certificate of appreciation for your academic contribution, a very excellent academic contribution as a distinguished visiting professor and facilitator for the series of workshops that we have done for the past 2 sessions of the College of Education MSU-IIT, signed by none other than our Dean of the College, Dr. Ami Buwan, and our Chancellor of the Institute, Professor Socarno D. Tanggol. May I ask all our colleagues to just open your mics and thank Dr. James for the 2 sessions that we spent together with him. Thank you so much, Dr. James.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
James.
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. James.
All right. So at this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come into the close, and I would like to ask the participants to join me with our photo opportunity with the visiting professor. And after that, I would like to post some announcements. The next session for this series of webinars with our visiting professor is a public lecture on the 14th of October, 1 in the afternoon Philippine time, entitled Using an Open Pedagogy Assessment to Teach Students About Knowledge Production in Society. So I guess I would like to ask Sir Jay to give us a few more details about who can enter, who can join this webinar public lecture with Dr. James. And secondly, I'd like to remind everyone to please fill in the evaluation form for this session. I think that would be the basis for our attendance of today and our certificate for the workshops as well. So I'd like to ask the tech team if they are ready for the photo opportunity.
Dr. James, thank you very much, and happy Teachers Day.